Welcome to you, those of you who are joined for today's session. We'll get started here in just a few moments. For those of you joining, we're going to get started here in just about 30 seconds or so. Thank you. All right, welcome everybody to today's session. My name is Josh Brothheim. I'm the training manager at Sumo Logic, and I'm going to be leading today's class. I also have one of my peers, Odell Gordon. He's out there. He's going to be manning the chat. So for today's session, if there's any questions, go ahead and post them in the chat. We'll get started here. So let's do it. So hopefully you're in the right place. Today we're going to be discussing Cloud SIEM fundamentals. So like I said, hopefully you're here for that content. And let's talk about what content we're going to be delivering. So here's an agenda. We're going to be together for the next 3 hours. 2 of those hours will be set aside for content, mostly labs and slides, actually completely labs and slides. And then we'll take the exam. So as you can see here with the agenda, we'll do a little review. We'll do some labs. We'll do some threat investigation with Cloud SIEM. We'll do some labs. We'll do some customizing. We'll do some labs. I think you kind of see a scheme going on there. And then once again, that exam at the end. So if you've taken an exam with us before, you kind of know what you're getting into. If you haven't, don't stress about it. We'll talk about it in more detail a little bit later. And one more slide before I stop talking about the exam is the reward that we want to provide to you. So typically in the past, we would do these in person and we'd have a fun day and we'd feed you and give you some swag. And well, we can't do that right now due to the state of the world. But what we do want to do is still reward you for doing a good job. So once you take today's class, which you're already starting to do, once you take the exam, which you'll do later, and once you pass it, more importantly, you can go ahead and fill out our form, which you may know about. I'll go ahead and put the link in the chat just in case you have a form you need to fill out already. But you can go ahead and let us know which class you've passed, provide your certificate, and we'll send you a free Uber Eats gift card for $15 US. So encourage everyone to take advantage of it. It's free food. It's a gift for doing a job well done. It's bribery, whatever you want to consider it, but I certainly encourage everyone to take advantage of it. So, and I'll remind you of that later as well. So if you forget that link or what have you, it will come back to you. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start to dive in. As mentioned, we're going to be alternating between slides and labs. So the first part of this is a little slide heavy, but not too bad. And then we'll jump into some labs and go back and forth. All right, so let's go. So let's talk about the Cloud SIEM data pipeline, because once again, that's kind of the whole reason we're here. So before we talk about the pipeline, let's talk about Cloud SIEM and define it. Make sure that we're all on the same page of what we're talking about for the next few hours. So what is Cloud SIEM? Cloud SIEM is a cloud-based enterprise-grade security information and event management system. And that's where that acronym comes in of SIEM, security information and event management. And going forward, I'll only refer to it as SIEM. I'm not going to read out the whole security information and event management, but that's what the acronym is. Cloud SIEM is going to leverage Sumo Logic's core functionality, which is going to include things like data collection, ingestion, storage, as well as threat intelligence. Cloud SIEM is a purchased add-on with an ever-expanding library of content that is designed for security operations. And because it's designed for larger data volumes, most organizations need to ingest a large amount of data each day for the insights to surface in Cloud SIEM. So now let's take a look at that pipeline that I was describing. Cloud SIEM is a powerful tool. It's going to take millions of log messages and funnel them down into a handful of actionable security insights. So let's see how that works. And what we have here is that pipeline that I've alluded to. At the very top, The logs are going to be collected and ingested into Sumo Logic and become messages. In that second portion of the map, once the messages are, once they're turned into messages, they're then going to be parsed, mapped, and enriched and turned into Cloud SIEM records. Now, the next step on this pipeline, these records are going to be compared to rules. If a rule is triggered, an entity is going to be extracted, a severity score is going to be assigned, and then a signal will be created. Now, if enough signals with the same entity cluster together, then they become an insight. And so that's where we have essentially these 4 steps or layers or what have you of the Cloud SIEM data pipeline. Now, we're going to focus on the later stages of this pipeline in this class, particularly the rules and the insights and investigation. So essentially the bottom half, this guy and this guy, are where we're going to be focusing on today. The top half we focus on in cloud administration, and if you join us tomorrow at this time, you'll get that content. But before we split it up into halves, like I was just describing, let's go through kind of each step one more time, if you will, a little more detail. So let's start at that top level. So in this example, let's say we're using Sumo Logic Coffee. This company collects and ingests millions of log messages into Sumo Logic. Now, typically you can use these messages right away in many Sumo Logic apps, but to use them in Cloud SIEM Enterprise, your admin must enable data forwarding. Your admin also needs to create log mappings, field extraction rules, and other pre-processing steps to extract the right data. Once again, we'll talk about those in more detail tomorrow when we do the administration class. Oh, keeps jumping ahead here. There we go. Now, before Cloud SIEM can start to generate security insights, once we have these log messages, as I mentioned, they need to go through some processing first. Cloud SIEM is going to process the messages and turn them into records. And then each record is going to contain the information from a message parsed into key value pairs, mapped to a Cloud SIEM schema, and enriched with other data. So I have a good example of this right now. So let's follow a simple log message down this pipeline that I just described. On the left-hand side of the screen, first the message is going to be parsed and extracted from the record, and that's what's starting to occur here. Then it's going to be mapped into a set of key value pairs. And this process is also going to fix basic formatting. This step is going to create semi-structured data. So what we have here, instead of IP-127-0-0-1 as it's presented on the left-hand side of the screen, the parsing steps extracts the IP address into a key value pair, where the key might be something like source device underscore IP, and then equals 127.0.0.1 with those hyphens normalized to dots. And then this information is mapped onto the Cloud SIEM schema. Finally, the record is going to be enriched with information from match lists or threat intelligence databases, such as its threat level. Oops. These normalized records are then going to be sent down the Cloud SIEM pipeline and compared to rules. And so once again, continuing this journey down the pipeline, each record ingested into Cloud SIEM is going to be compared to hundreds of built-in and custom rules. And if a rule triggers, an entity is going to be extracted and a signal is going to be created. If a record matches the criteria specified in a rule, then Cloud SIEM is going to create a signal. And the severity is going to be a number between 1 and 10 that's going to tell Cloud SIEM how serious the potential threat is. When the signal is created, it's going to contain a name, an entity, a severity, a stage, a description. A signal is always going to contain at minimum an entity and a severity. Now, I've alluded to this term entity a few times, but I don't think I've really properly defined it yet. So let's go ahead and do so. The entity in the signal is going to be something like an IP address, a MAC address, a host name. It's going to tell us who or what was involved in the event that the record described. Entities are going to be extracted from records, and every signal has an entity. The entity's activity score is the sum of all the severity scores of all the signals it appears in. And we'll talk about that math a little bit later, so don't get too bogged down in how that score is calculated, but it is. And so we'll look at it in more detail a little bit later. All right. Now, Cloud SIEM is going to take everything one step further and correlate these signals into a manageable number of insights. An insight is going to be a group of signals clustered around a single entity. And that insight is created, once again, starting to get a little mathy here, but the insight is created when the sum of the severity scores of signals with the same entity goes above a certain activity score within a certain time frame. Now, by default, this activity score of 12 within the last 14 days is what's going to trigger it. Once again, don't worry too much about the math. We'll look at a better example later, but that's important to note. Now, once an insight is created, then you can start a security investigation and start to take actions like alerting a SOC teammate or executing playbooks. And we're going to look at that in app pretty soon. Yeah, we're getting there. Probably one more slide and then we'll get in app. And once again, questions, please ask. Myself, Odell are here for you, so give a shout. All right, but this last slide before we get in app is what we call the insight radar. Now, the entire data pipeline can be thought of as a funnel with your log messages going in the top and the insights coming out the bottom. And so while you might ingest millions of log messages, you might only get a few hundred signals and maybe a handful of insights. The insight radar, as shown on the screen here, in Cloud SIEM UI is going to use this funnel shape from a top-down perspective. So as you go towards the center, there's going to be fewer items. So what we see here is the outer edge, this blue line or two blue lines. This is representing the records that have been ingested. This dark blue line or two lines is going to show relative number of records in the last 24 hours, like a clock. And so what we start to see here are spikes or dips that are representing times when more or less records than average were ingested. Now we go into the middle circle. The middle circle is representing the signals that have been generated from those records. Here we're using more of a bar graph theme where each bar is going to represent the number of signals generated at that time, broken into 15-minute slices. And then finally, we have the innermost circle, which is going to represent the insights that have been correlated from those signals. And here we have the triangles representing those insights. It's important to note that some triangles may represent two or more insights if multiple insights are generated at the same time. So what I want to do now is I want to dig into the application, bring you into Sumo. So let's go ahead and do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to log into the system together. If you've ever logged in with us to a training environment, you kind of know where we're going with this already. I'm going to put the credentials in the chat. Go ahead and log in. So how we log in, if you haven't before, is we're going to go to service.sumologic.com. The email address we're going to use is training plus analyst number, and I want you to select a 3-digit number. So maybe you want to be training plus analyst 007. Maybe you want to be training plus analyst 294725. Pick a 3-digit number. And so that email is training plus analyst, 3-digit number at sumologic.com. And then that password we're going to use is security22 exclamation point. So go ahead and get logged in. Once you get logged in, if you can put your number in the chat just so we can confirm you did get logged in. If you need help getting logged in, please shout because that's why we're here. The other thing I'm going to do while you're getting logged in is I'm going to add to the chat a lab book. Let me just find where I put it. Here it is. So I'm uploading a lab guide and we'll use that together to go through the labs, hence the name of it. All right, cool. Looks like some of you are getting logged in. I'm going to log in as well because I need to do this with you. And if you don't want to log in or can't log in, you're welcome. If you can't log in, we want to help you with that. If you don't want to log in, that we can't, but you're welcome to go ahead and just watch. I'm going to go through the labs one by one, so you'll get the full experience. And let me go ahead and log out of this account. And let me log in as a training user. All right, so hopefully you're logged in. I'm going to pause just another moment or two, kind of tap dancing here for anybody else that needs time to get logged in. And once again, please don't be shy if you can't. Well, you know, like I said, here to help you with that. Yeah, but I'm going to assume we're okay. We're being quiet, so I think that's all right. So once again, we should have Sumo Logic open. and we should have our handy dandy lab guide over here. Where you put it, that's up to you, but you should have it. Now let me get to the top because that's a pretty good place to start. So in the lab guide, we're going to start with lab 0. Lab 0 we should have done because that's logging in, pretty straightforward. But we do take it a step further with lab 0. With lab 0, what we want you to do is get into the Cloud SIEM Enterprise. So hopefully you're logged in. And when you're logged in, you should have a black bar. If you can't find the black bar, it might be hidden, but you should be able to get to it. And then once you can get to it, there should now be an option for Cloud SIEM Enterprise. Go in and click on it. And what it should do is bring you into the environment I'm being brought into now. And so that's where I'd like everybody to be up to. So ideally, we have logged in to Sumo. We have our lab guide, and now following the lab guide or just following my instructions, we're now in the Cloud SIEM Enterprise environment. And as it says, that's it. So lab 0, pretty straightforward, but we're going to go ahead and do a little bit more while we're in here. We'll go ahead into lab 1. Before we do though, in lab 0, just last thing is the Sumo icon on the top left. This will bring you back to this heads-up display homepage. And so as you're navigating, if you need to go back home, that's a good way to do so. And so I'm just pausing. I see a few more. Let's see. Does anyone ever? Let's see. Oh, some of you can't get the lab guide. Let me paste it in one more time. What might be happening here, is if you're on I think the web version of Zoom, you might not be able to get access to it. So what I'd like you to do is go ahead and put in the chat. And Odell, if you can go ahead and work with the individual and just email them a copy of the lab guide, that would be helpful. So if you need the lab guide, if you want to go ahead and put your email in the chat, Odell can send one out to you. The other thing you can do, let me show you as well. Let me just think if I can do this. Yeah, let me show you as well. It should work. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into Sumo. And certification, get certified. And you can go to recorded live training. So let me show the steps again. I'm sorry, I went a little fast. So if you need the lab guide, once again, it should be in the chat. You can message Odell, or you can get it from an app. So if you are on the home page, go to certification, go ahead and click on get certified. When you do, it should open up our training portal. Once you're in the training portal, go to recorded live training. And what we have in here are many of our classes, actually all our classes. The class we're doing today is, what are we doing today? We're doing Cloud SIEM Fundamentals. So you can go ahead and click on that guy. And it's going to ask you to register for free. You can ignore that, or not ignore it. You actually have to do that. And then here is that lab guide. Oh, and a recording of myself as well. So don't want to hear myself. So hopefully that gets you the lab guide as well. I'm just going to pause again just to make sure we're all good. Nobody's screaming, so I assume we're okay. And like I said, if you need help with it, let Odell will hand deliver, well, not hand deliver it, email it as well. All right, so let's go back into Sumo Logic, back into Cloud SIEM Enterprise, and let's take a look at Lab 1. And in Lab 1, what we're doing is we're looking at the homepage, and we're going to go through it. And what we're seeing here, and I hope it's being portrayed properly to you, not being portrayed, well, I'm about to portray it, but the idea of the scale of how Cloud SIEM is helping. What we see on the top left here is our records, our signals, and our insights. By default, it's for the last 24-hour time period. You're going to have the ability to customize that right now, and we're going to play with it in the labs, but you start to see the scale of what's occurring. Over the last 24 hours, 48,000 records have been looked at through Sumo Logic. Of those 48,000 records, there have been 10,000 signals. Of those 10,000 signals, there's only 6 insights. And so I, as somebody who's utilizing this tool, really just need to look at the 6 insights. I don't need to look at 48,000 things or records. I just need to look at 6 insights. That's a lot less. That's easier. And so that's saving me a lot of time. Now, what we have around the ring here is once again, as described in the labs, in the screenshot that I showed earlier, we have our records, we have our signals, and then we have our insights. And so we can use the time filter here to start to sort those. So for example, how many records have been ingested in the last 8 hours, change the toggle to 8 hours, and we start to see 5,000 records. Conversely, or not conversely, but similarly, how many signals have been created in the last 7 days? When we choose the last 7 days, we really see that kind of scale that I was describing. In the past 7 days, there's been 200, almost half a million, 250,000 records that the system has processed. 32,000 signals, still a lot of signals, but only 26 insights. So over the last 7 days, there's really just 26 things for us to look at. And once again, that's easier than looking at 213,000. So that's helpful here. In lab 1, step 2, we're going to look at that insight radar. And so that's what we're starting to see here. By playing with the toggle, we can start to play with the radar. And we're actually seeing not much ingestion, which might actually be a problem that I need to look at later, but for now it's okay. And we're seeing the signals, and then in the inner ring, we're seeing those insights. With those insights, we see the status of them. So we also see that over here. And the status is going to be helpful because of these, for example, 6 insights, only 4 are new. We might be working in an environment with other people. And so somebody might have grabbed that other insight and already looked at it and closed it, or taken one of those and set it to in progress. And so now we don't have to look at 6 things. We only have to look at 4, and more time to look at other things going on. Let's see. So answering 2A, the question about when were the most records ingested in the last 24 hours, when were the least? And so once again, we're using this blue bar or blue line to represent those peaks as well as those valleys. For the signals, we're using the bars here. These are broken out into, I think I said 15 minutes earlier, I meant 20-minute periods. And so we can see this one is twice as high as this one. And so relative to one to another, we can start to see when there were peaks and valleys as well. Now, the last question to see here is, it's not a trick question by any means. It's not meant to be a trick question, but it is something that might not be obvious. So the question is, how many insights have been generated in the last 24 hours? Now, if we look at these triangles, we might think, well, there's 4 triangles, and so 4 insights, but that's not always the case. An insight, or rather a triangle, can represent multiple insights. And that's actually what we see up here. No, where was it? This one right here, where we have 3 insights are occurring within that 30-minute range. And so one triangle is representing 3 of them. So not that confusing, but just something to be aware of course. All right. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start to jump into the content that is that's part of the Cloud SIEM product. And what we're going to look at are rules. So what I want us to do is go to the top of the screen and go to content. Once you do, you're going to have a couple of options. The option I want you to focus on for right now is going to be rules. Now, by default, once it loads, there should not be a filter. If there is, go ahead and cancel it or close it. There really shouldn't be one automatically. Now it's going to take a moment to load. Actually, it's loading. There we go. And what we're now seeing are all the rules that have been created. These have been created by somebody at Sumo Logic. And so they're all pre-built, ready to go, ready for you to utilize. Now, if we want to look at those rules, we can do so utilizing our filter, and that's what we're going to just play with kind of quickly right now. So for example, if we wanted to look for the rules that have the name containing firewall, we could go and utilize our filter and use name contains firewall. And once we run that, we should see those rules that exist associated with firewalls, and there should be 11. If you get 10, that's, well, you should for this screen, you should get exactly what I get. And so now we can start to see those rules. We can continue filtering. Remember, with these rules, severity score is going to be important here. And so we can start to use the filter to look at specific severity scores. So if we wanted to look at those severity scores greater than 8, we would specify the filter. We're showing you the filtering here because it's a little bit different than other areas filtering for Sumo Logic. It's not any more difficult, just it is a little bit different. And so I wanted to show you that and have you just experience a little bit. This last one here, how many rules detect the persistence tactic? We haven't talked about tactics too much. I think I mentioned, maybe I didn't even mention them yet. But what we have the ability to do, or the system has the ability to do, is start to label and tag your rules with different, as are referred to as tactics and techniques. And we'll talk about those in more detail, but we can go ahead and utilize those to look up the rules that apply here. So if I wanted to look for persistence, it's not really obvious on how to do it. What I would do is I would select the tag contains the tactic and then persistence. And what it's doing is it's utilizing the MITRE ATT&CK framework, which we'll talk about in more detail shortly, to attribute those rules with that framework, essentially. All right. Now, the next portion of what I want to do is going to the top bar, but I want to show the entities. So to get to it, you click on the Entities tab, or button, or whatever you want to call it. Now, remember, these entities are essentially these almost like proper nouns. So they're going to be names of things. They're going to be a username. They're going to be an IP address, a host name, a computer name, something of that level, I guess you could say. And so that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing all the entities that have been identified by the system. We see the entity scores, and we're going to look at these right now in a little bit more detail, but we start to see those right here. And we can start to utilize the score for filtering. So if we wanted to start to look at those entities that have an activity score of 5 or greater, we can go ahead and use our filter, use the activity score field. And then what did I say, greater than 5? I said 5 or greater, so it should actually be that. I think the lab tells you to do greater than 5, but that's not technically correct. So there we see those. If we want to look at entities that have an activity score of 0, you kind of see where I'm going with this. Activity score is 0. And now, just to see if anybody knows, as it says, and we're not really going to make a discussion, but the question is, what does an entity with an activity of 0 mean? Does anybody know? I'm going to assume everybody wasn't screaming all at once for the answer, but essentially what it's telling us is that the system has identified this entity, but there hasn't been really any data or activity associated with it. And so that's why these are zeros. Feel free to click around, by the way. I should have mentioned this earlier. I kind of assume you will, but we're going to go through these labs pretty prescriptive as you have them. But if you want to go ahead and just kind of poke your head around, click on some other things, feel free to. You can't really break anything in here. And then finally, what we're going to do just to get back to the home, or really just to finish up the lab, is click on that icon on the top left, which will then bring us back to that Cloud SIEM HUD. Something I forgot to mention about the HUD, and it's really my favorite thing about the HUD, is what you see here is a heads-up display. That's not unique, but it's meant to be have a very video game-ish feel in a positive way. And so you look at this and you get a very quick and clean understanding of what's going on. Things are spiking, things aren't, what have you. This is intentionally so. It was actually created by a video game designer. One of the individuals who created this used to work on World of Warcraft, which was a very popular video game, and I guess still kind of is. And so it's meant to be helpful and at a glance. And so I think it's just kind of cool looking. All right. Let's see here. We're just about done with those labs. So I'm going to jump back to my slides for a little bit, and then we'll come back to the labs a little bit later. Let me just get this loaded. Not quite sure why it's taking so long. There we go. Okay. Whoop. So what we just did in lab one, very straightforward, was we just looked at the Cloud SIM UI. We looked at the summary stats on that left nav. We looked at or used the Insight Radar. We looked at those built-in rules, and then we saw those entities that are being tracked. Now what we want to do is get started with threat investigation. The slide is pretty descriptive. Now, in this course, we're going to use a couple of different examples of end data from some fictional companies. We have 3 fictional companies that we're going to utilize today. Actually, I don't know that we'll use all of them, but I'll describe the scenario because they're on the slide. So the 3 that we're going to play with are, first, we have Financial Logic. They are a major player in the banking industry. They meet all the GDPR and international compliance standards, but their big investors are targets for hackers. And so that's their concern, being targets for hackers. Sumo Pharma, they're a healthcare company, and they ship prescription meds to patients. They meet all their HIPAA standards, HIPAA guidelines, but they're concerned about data privacy. They want to monitor all their data and make sure their patients are safe. And then we have Sumo Coffee. They're a small retail business with a big tech idea, automating the entire coffee business from bean to cup. Now, in addition to consumer protections like PCI, DSS, their main concern is keeping computing costs down while their startup grows. So we have 3 companies, different concerns. And before we talk specifically about those concerns and those scenarios, let's talk more about threat investigation. As a reminder, threat investigation is reactive, while threat hunting is proactive. Typically, threat investigation is going to happen in response to an alert. Once you've investigated a threat, you can then hunt for similar threats and take precautionary steps to prevent attacks from happening again. Threat investigation is an iterative scientific process, much like troubleshooting. In both threat investigation and troubleshooting, you first monitor your system. Once an anomaly is detected, you can make a hypothesis about how it happened and diagnose the problem. As you dig deeper, you may want to revise this initial hypothesis and find more clues about why or how the attack or error happened. And as you investigate and trace these events, you want to start to answer as many WH questions as you can about the event to tell the story, such as who is behind the event, what assets did the event affect, where did the event occur, when did the event occur, why did the event occur, and how did the event occur. Finally, you can take action to resolve the issue, and there's going to be many actions you can take in response to an incident. You might need to work with your IT team to isolate and wipe laptops that have been infected with malware so they don't prevent more malicious code. You might need to work with your HR team to enforce mandatory anti-phishing training among all employees to prevent future attacks. So a couple different ways of how you can take this. Now, Cloud SIEM can help with every step of the threat investigation process. Cloud SIEM is going to automatically detect and monitor potential threats by analyzing those millions of records and distilling them into a handful of insights with a low false positive rate. Once you choose your insight, you can start to dig through all the raw logs and signals to conduct deep dive investigations and even proactive threat hunts. You can organize your thoughts, make hypotheses, and take notes about your investigation in the comments of each insight. And this will share your ideas with your SOC teammates and help you keep track of your investigation. You can also take direct action, take certain actions directly from the insight. So you can email your teammates, you can create JIRA tickets, you can execute playbooks and other custom actions with the actions button. And then finally, you can update the insight. You can mark it as in progress or closed. When you close it, you can mark it as resolved or false positive or duplicate or no action. And by updating the status correctly, you're going to help the Cloud SIEM Insight Engine produce more accurate insights for your org in the future. Now, of course, this process will repeat each day as new insights are generated for you to investigate. All right, this next slide is going to talk about that MITRE ATT&CK framework that I alluded to a little bit earlier. MITRE ATT&CK, the matrix, as it's called, the MITRE ATT&CK matrix, is published by a group called MITRE, and they're a nonprofit research organization. As you see here, the word attack is spelled kind of creatively, excuse me. What ATTACK stands for is adversarial tactics, techniques, and common knowledge. And what this framework does is it organizes and categorizes the tactics and techniques that criminals, hacktivists, nation states, and other adversaries might use. This includes attacks like exfiltrating databases, installing malware, stealing credentials, and other nefarious activities you and your SOC team are trying to stop. Cloud SIEM is going to use these same tactic names for the stage of signals and the names of insights. So once you're familiar with ATTACK, or if you are familiar with ATTACK, navigating Cloud SIEM's insight pages becomes easier. If you're not familiar with this, that's perfectly fine, but just letting you know this is where some of the naming conventions comes from. Now, using this framework here and at a high level, let's go ahead and now talk about our fictional companies again. Which MITRE ATTACK tactics and techniques might they prioritize? And once again, here's an example of some of them. This doesn't have all the tactics and techniques, but certainly some of them. So Financial Logic, they're concerned about keeping clients' data secure. The attack that they are concerned about is credential access. All their customers have user credentials tied to financial accounts, and so somebody utilizing that credential access is potentially harmful. Sumo Pharma, a group that's concerned about patients' privacy, and with HIPAA, things like that. For them, exfiltration of private data is a major concern. Sumo Coffee, they were concerned about monitoring their infrastructure to make sure their apps are being as efficient as possible. Now, for them, execution is a particular concern because many executable files can utilize precious computing resources. So they all have their own concerns and all want to investigate or focus on different areas. Now, the insight page is going to show everything you need to start unraveling the security events. When the signals cluster together, Cloud SIEM is going to utilize these tactics and techniques to name the insights they generate. And once again, that insight name can point us to how the event occurred or why the adversary is behaving that way. For example, a tactic name like discovery or persistence shows the reasons the adversary has. Similarly, a tactic name like initial access or execution can tell you a little about the methods the adversary used. These names are just starting points, however, and you may need to revise your hypothesis as you continue your investigations. Now, when we get into the insights, we're going to have the ability to utilize the timeline. And the timeline is going to tell us when the event occurred. Now, this screen, there's a lot of blue going on here, so it's a little just distracting. But what we see here is whether each signal was triggered at the same time or sequentially, as well as whether everything happened over minutes, hours, or days. Remember, by default, insights are related signals that cluster together within the last 14 days. In this example on the screen here, we see some signals occurred several days before the others, but 3 of them are clustered together more recently on the far right of the screen. And so that's giving us this timeline and giving us the ability to start to understand when during a 14-day period did these things happen. The entity, mentioned this a few times now. Once again, that is going to help point you to the who, the what, the where the event occurred. That entity is going to be that IP address of a hacked device, the location of an adversary, the location of the database that leaked, the owner of a website, or some other piece of the puzzle. And remember, each insight only has one entity it's clustered around. Come on. All right, there we go. Sorry about that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and do lab 2. So I'm going to go ahead and jump back into Cloud SIEM over here, and I'm going to grab my lab book right here. Now with my lab book, we have lab 2, we have 2A, we have 2B, and we have 2C. Each A, B, and C is representing the different fictitious company I just described. So lab 2A is Financial Logic, 2B is Sumo Pharma, and 2C is Sumo Coffee. What we're going to do is we're going to pick, let's say time-wise, I think we'll just pick one of these and go through them. Feel free to go through another one either now or on your own time. But I think just going through one will kind of give you the gist. So I'm going to do 2A. And so what I'm going to do is follow the steps in 2A. So let me just move this over. So in 2A, what we're dealing with is financial logic. And so what we want to do is we want to go ahead and look at an alert that they received. And specifically, we want to look at an insight called persistence with initial access. So to find that, what we're going to do is we're going to go up to the insights. We can alternate the way the insights are displayed by using this show list or show board. Just want to show those two options because they are kind of helpful. And what we want to do is we want to look for a new insight that's called persistence with initial access. I'm actually going to go to the other view. It'll be a little bit easier. So I can go ahead and scroll for it. This is the one I'm looking for. Or I can go ahead and start to search for it using my filters as I was doing earlier. I'm going to go ahead and grab one just a little further out, just so we're not overlapping. It doesn't really matter if we are. So I'm going to grab this persistence with initial access. Now, by clicking on it, now I'm being brought into the insight. And I was trying to show you that earlier, but now you actually see it. So this is what an insight looks like. What do we see here? Well, let's start with the far left. We see the name that's been provided to it using the MITRE ATT&CK framework. We see the status of this. Is it new? Is it in progress? Whatever. We see the assignee. Certainly, as we, in a real environment, we might want to pick these items up, and so we might want to assign them to ourselves or somebody else, depending on our level. We see the entity. So remember that IP address, that kind of noun, if you will. And then in the center of the screen, we see kind of the important stuff. Well, the other stuff is important as well, but we see the insight. So at the top of the screen, we see the chart of time. We see what has been detected. Rules have been triggered. Threat intelligence has been triggered, and we're starting to see that here. And then down below each event, in this case, there have been 4 kind of things that have been triggered. We start to see those triggers here. So let's look at these. What do we see here? We see some threat intelligence here, an IP matching a hash. So this file download is being checked. We see proof point notifying us that a user received an email with a phishing link. We see right after the user received an email with a phishing link, we see checkpoint confirming that a malicious file was allowed. And then we see CrowdStrike detecting the summary or showing a detection of that. And so this is starting to help us understand what's taking place. We're starting to see when these events occurred. And once again, with the time, we can start to see that, as it says, the total of the severity scores, 3 + 4 + 3 + 5. And we'll get into why that's flagged as an insight, but it's higher than 12. And that's really the trigger here. And so with that summary, once again, we see the phishing link was received. We see the person clicked on the phishing link and downloaded the file. We see CrowdStrike detected that as a known malicious file. And so that is what caused the insight. Now, how do we handle this? Well, as it says, we could take many approaches. We could lock down the user's account and re-image the machine. We could prevent them from downloading in the future. We could add, a couple different steps, but we're starting to see that in here. We can also, just in the vein of kind of clicking around for the sake of clicking around, because there can be value in that, we can go into these signals that are being detected. So for example, this email phishing link, I can click on it and now I get a lot more detail. Might be overkill, might not be, but this detail is provided to me, and somebody utilizing or who knows what to look for in here, this can be quite helpful. All right, cool. Let's see. Time-wise, we're good. Let me see here. Let me go back to my slide deck. And please, any questions, please ask, feel free to. I'm going back to my deck, and I'm going to go back to this slide right here. Okay. So what I want to do now is talk about, well, I've been talking about threat investigation and threat hunting, but go even a little bit deeper now. Now, insights provide that great high-level summary of potential security threats. And because Cloud SIEM's threat intelligence and sophisticated correlation engine exists, very few insights are going to be false positives. So they are all worth investigating. However, sometimes you want to investigate deeper to really understand what happened, or you might want to do proactive threat hunting. The Signals tab is going to allow you to look at those signals created by the rules that have been triggered in your system in the last 14 days. As a reminder, signals provide summaries of potential security threats, but not all signals are security incidences. For example, there could be a reason why somebody might be logged in from 2 different devices at the same time, or why somebody has several failed password attempts on an account. It doesn't always mean a malicious hacker is trying to take over the world. Sometimes it does, but not always. When you click on that signal, you have the option to see the full detail of the records that triggered it. And that's going to include information like the IP address, the geolocation, threat level. And then, as a reminder, we have the Entities tab, and that's going to show those entities that rules have detected in the last 14 days. It's going to have the activity score associated with it. And we're going to talk about that activity score and generation and insight creation with the math that's associated with it. It's very basic math, but we'll talk about that in about soon, pretty soon. All right. Oops. Now, context actions. These are going to be found throughout the Cloud SIEM UI. And on the right-hand side of the screen, we see a pretty good video or a little graphic playing that's showing us how to access that. With those context actions, entities in the insights, signals, and entities pages will have context actions. And to access them, you're going to hover next to the entity. And when you do, you're going to see a 6-dot icon. And it may appear if there's context actions available for that app, for that object. The context actions might be something like inserting the entity into an API call, doing a DNS lookup, or other tasks. And your administrator can add custom context actions as well. And I think we talk about that tomorrow. Yeah, I'm pretty sure we talk about customs tomorrow. Now, an in-depth threat investigation is going to use the best of Cloud SIEM as well as Sumo Logic's core tools. And there's several ways to bring the information you find in Cloud SIEM back to the Sumo Logic platform. One context action is Sumo Logic search, and that's what I'm actually showing it right here. We're going to do this in a moment. Essentially, selecting this action is going to create a log search in Sumo Logic. And so what we can do is we can look for all log messages with that entity, even if it wasn't detected by a rule in Cloud SIEM. And so essentially, as you see here, and we're going to do shortly, it's taking the IP address and bringing it into Sumo Logic. Very, very simple, but very helpful. And then we're seeing those log messages associated with that IP address. And as mentioned, we'll do that in the lab in just a moment, or yeah, pretty soon. Now, finally, in Cloud SIEM, there's going to be several different actions you can take on each insight. You can comment on the insight. You can close it. You can assign a status to it. And we're going to do those actions in a few moments. When you close that insight, remember Cloud SIEM is going to use that resolution information to reduce false positives and duplicates further. And so assigning a status to the insight lets you keep working on it and keep track of your progress. You can also assign the insight to yourself, to a colleague, use those actions button to alert colleagues, create JIRA tickets, send Slack messages, use APIs. And that action button is customizable, but it can only be configured by admins. All right, well, so what I'm going to do now, or what we're going to do now, is we're going to jump into lab 3. So get out of here. Get into Sumo Logic, get into heads-up display. And now we're going to go ahead and do lab 3A. So in 3A, what we want to do is we actually want to go back, and I should have told you just to stay there, back to that persistence with initial access insight. So what we want to do is we want to go back to our insights, back to our persistence with initial access. I'll grab that other one that I was using. And now what we want to do is we want to utilize the hover eye and context actions. So for this example, what we're going to do is we're going to utilize the IP address, the entity there. So we're going to go to the entity, and when we get kind of near it, we should get these 6 dots. When we do, we can click on the 6 dots and we can perform many different context actions. We could take this IP address and do a Google web search with it. We could take this IP address and add it to a match list or a suppressed list. We can take this IP address and do a virus total search. Or what we can do is do a Sumo Logic search. When we do, very simply, as described, it's just taking that IP address as a keyword and pasting it into a Sumo Logic query. Yes, we could have just copied and pasted it or typed it out manually, but those context actions are a lot easier, especially as you get more advanced with the context action. Once it's done, or once it's doing something, it's now going to look for that IP address. Now, in this case, I'm going to expand my query out a little bit longer just to find some data. I'm going to do the last 24 hours should be enough. And what I'm going to be shown here are the locations that have my IP address in my logs. So here's the IP address showing up. Here it's showing up. Here it's showing up related to this data, et cetera, et cetera. It's actually showing up quite a lot. It's showing up 6,000 times over the last 3 hours, over the last 24 hours, excuse me. Now, what we're going to do next is we're going to create a query that's going to allow us to look at where it's showing up a little bit more clearly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and grab the query that's in step 6, and it continues to the next page. So just an FYI there. So I'm going to do a new log search. I'm going to grab my query that's on page 13 and on page 14, copy and paste it, and I'm going to grab that other one, copy and paste that as well. Now I need to take my IP address and add it to this new query. So I'm going to grab that IP address. I'm going to paste it in right about there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to redo my quotes. Actually, no, you may need to, you may not need to. Since you're pasting from a PDF, sometimes it doesn't paste very friendly. Not really a Sumo problem or a PDF problem. But what this is about to do when I run it, and let me just expand my time frame out further, is I'm about to go ahead and look at the index SEC record, which is representing all those records that have been brought into Sumo, into Cloud SIEM, excuse me. Then I'm going to sort the data into an hour bucket, essentially. Show me or group my data in hour quantities. Show me my data from 7 to 8, 8 to 9, 9 to 10. I'm going to look specifically for the device IP that we're looking for, because that's kind of the whole point of this. And then I'm going to go ahead and count. When I count, what I'm going to do is I'm going to count by the time slice and the metadata vendor and product information. And this is now going to start to tell me where that IP address is showing up. So what I see is over the last 24 hours, this IP address has shown up associated with my CrowdStrike data and my Proofpoint data. Now, what I can do in this last step, which is kind of overkill because this is a pretty easy way to understand it, but what I can do is I can actually transpose this and sort everything by these time slices. And so what I should now see is from 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock, this IP has shown up twice. And I see where it has shown up. And that now gives me the ability to start to be more proactive in my threat hunting and start to go down that rabbit hole, essentially, if you will. So as described, we've now explored these raw logs. Now what we can do is we want to kind of finish things up. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our insight, and we can go ahead and modify, I was going to say play, but modify the status. Is it no longer in new? Well, no, it's in progress because I'm working it. I don't want somebody else to grab this. It's mine. So I might assign it to myself as well. There we go. So now it's assigned to me and it's in progress. And then I can go ahead, if I finished everything, I can go ahead and close this. So let's say I go ahead and I dig into this. The resolution I select is going to be pretty important here because remember, the system's going to start to learn off this. So if this was a false positive, I want to describe as such. If it's a duplicate, I want to be specific. I want to make sure I put the appropriate action. And so I want to be deliberate in my choice. Once again, for here, we're just playing around. It doesn't really matter. So, feel free to click whatever. But that's how we can go ahead and then close that insight. And now we'd be done with that insight. And now we might go back to the heads up display and say, all right, that one's closed. Let's look at the ones that are new, dig into those and start to investigate. And so that's starting to show your workflow. All right, cool. Let's see, questions. I think we're a quiet group, but that's okay. Let me go back to my deck. I think we're going to take a break in a moment here. Just make sure. Yeah, let's take a break now. Time-wise, yeah, we're doing well. So let's go ahead and we'll take a break. Let me put up let's do an 8-minute timer. So we'll take a break. We'll come back. We'll do more slides, a few more labs, and then we'll get into that exam and get you running. So let me start this. Come on. Oop, nope, not 60 minutes. There we go, 8 minutes. So I'm like I said, I'll take a break, grab a little beverage. I'd encourage you to do the same. If you have questions, go ahead and post them in there. And we can take a look at what's going on. So cool. All right, everybody, welcome back. Hopefully you had a good break, had a snack, a beverage, stood up and stretched, whatever it might be, but now we're back together. Um, Before we continue, let me just get my slides kind of in the right spot so we're ready to continue. There was a question, a very good question by Lynn about explaining why there's the entity of 127.0.0.1. And Odell attempted to explain the more technical answer for 127.0.0.1, but I think I suspect Lynn understands why that is significant, why it is a little peculiar for it to be showing up in the records as an entity. And very simply is we use it, this is test data. When we play tomorrow, play tomorrow with one of our labs, we're going to actually send a log message to Cloud SIEM, and we're going to utilize that IP address because it's a reserved IP address, I guess you could say. So most likely that would not show up in real records because it's not really a real IP address. It's reserved for the computer. And so that's why. So good question. Hopefully my explanation made a little sense. But like I said, you'll see it tomorrow. And that's why it's showing up in there, is because when we run those labs, it's picking it up. That's because it's showing up in our Sumo SIEM. Okay, then I thought my answer was correct, but let me double check on that for you, Lynn. Yeah, my understanding was it shouldn't, but if it is, then I'll double check. Yeah, let me just make a little note here. And anyone else with questions, please ask. It's a very good question. All right, got my note here. Cool. All right, so let's go ahead and pick up. We're going to go through a few more slides here, a bunch of slides here, probably about 8, and then we're going to do some few labs. So we will have you out of here early today, which I think everyone's kind of cool with. All right, so there we go. So what I wanted to talk about next is customizing and tuning your Cloud SIEM. Now, once you've completed a few investigations, you might want to add or modify rules, data sources, match lists, and other pieces of the Cloud SIEM puzzle. These modifications can help you further reduce false positives or alert you even faster. The most common thing that you want to customize are rules and/or insights. Rules are one of the most important pieces of Cloud SIEM's threat detection engine. All the records that are ingested in Cloud SIEM are compared to every rule in Cloud SIEM. Remember, records are just normalized log messages. Now, if there's a match, an entity is going to be extracted, a signal is going to be created, and those entities are, if there's a match, an entity is extracted. Yeah. There we go. So once again, one more time. If there's a match, an entity is extracted and a signal is created. Those entities are then tracked and may correlate with other signals to create an insight, which is where most threat investigations begin. Now, what I want to talk about next are writing rules, or different rule types, really. You don't have to write these rules from scratch. Once again, Sumo Logic's content team creates and maintains hundreds of out-of-the-box rules. And when we went to look at those rules and we saw 711 or whatever it was, those were all created by Sumo Logic. We maintain them, we update them frequently, and you can check and see them. But sometimes you might need to write a new rule from scratch. Why would you want to do that? You might do this if your system has a source that's not covered by the default rules, or if you're looking for a threat that's not covered by the default rules. Custom rules will not be updated or deleted by Sumo Logic during these regular updated periods. They're independent from the default rules. So if you do decide to create custom rules or rule tuning expressions, those rules will not be modified or deleted by Sumo's regular updates. Now, there's 4 types of rules. The first one is match rule, which is the most simple one. This is going to take a simple Boolean statement and check if it's true or false. If it's true, then an entity is going to be extracted and a signal will be created. For example, we might want to look for whether an IP address matches on a banned list. Very, kind of binary, true or false. Threshold rules, a little more advanced. These are going to be triggered when a match is found a certain number of times. So for example, if 1 failed login attempt is acceptable, but 5 failed login attempts are not, then a threshold rule could fire after the 5th failed login attempt. With a chain rule, these are going to fire when certain different events happen in a certain time window. So if we wanted to look for 5 failed login attempts followed by 1 successful login within 1 hour, then we would use a chain rule. Finally, we have aggregation rules. They're not used very frequently, but they're there, so I'm going to mention them. These are going to be triggered when up to 6 different events accumulate over time. So if we wanted to create a rule that looks for a large number of event types from a single device IP, then an aggregation rule might be appropriate. Now, what I want to show next is a blank rule template in Cloud SIEM. We're going to go into Cloud SIEM, or we're already in there, and play around with this in a few moments. But before we do, I just wanted to give an overview. What we have here is pretty simply left-hand side of the screen and right-hand side of the screen, if and then. So if something is triggered and it triggers, then we can create a signal off it. So when a rule is created, we're going to configure the condition it matches. It's going to be a short piece of code, and depending on the rule type that we're creating. We can also add rule tuning expressions, and we will do so in a few moments, which are going to be small exceptions to rules that are appended with an end statement. Now, once we've all done all that on kind of the left-hand side of the screen, then we can set the conditions for the rule to fire. We can configure the signal that it will be created. We can go ahead and include details like the name, the entity, the description, the MITRE ATT&CK tactic and technique that we're looking for with this rule. And then finally, we're going to configure the rule severity with a score. This is going to be on a scale from 0 to 10, 10 being the most severe. You might want to choose a 0 if we want to monitor something, but not necessarily create an insight for it. Higher severity scores are going to be more likely to trigger instances, or trigger insights, excuse me. All right. Now I have some best practices here. And so before you create custom rules from scratch, these are some best practices to follow. First, you want to check the existing rules in your system. As mentioned, Sumo Logic has hundreds of built-in rules, and so you might not need to write a new one. Or maybe, as I just alluded to, you may just need to make a small change to an existing rule, like adding a rule tuning expression or adjusting a severity score. Next, you need to know your system well. You need to understand the schema and the log mapping of all the records ingested into Cloud SIEM to write effective rules. You might want to work with an administrator on your team who knows how to write these better rules. We're also going to cover this tomorrow, so you can become that administrator, but knowing your system is helpful. Knowing your company's risk tolerance, their risk appetite, their priorities is going to be very important here as well. For example, some companies might want to monitor a large amount of outbound traffic, but not consider a large amount of outbound traffic to be a threat. So they might, there we go. So they might go ahead and assign a rule that's showing a large amount of outbound traffic a severity of 0. Another company might be alarmed by outbound traffic and consider it to be data exfiltration, and they might assign that same rule a 5. Once again, two different approaches to the same thing. Understanding the type of rules that we have and that you might want to utilize. If your use case requires a chain rule and you're trying to write a threshold rule, the rule might not be as efficient or effective, or just might not work at all. And then making small changes and testing them is going to be important. When we go ahead and start to, for example, if we want to decrease a severity score, let's say we have a rule with a severity score at 8, and we want to bring it all the way down to a 2. Let's decrease the score from an 8 to a 7. Let's monitor and see how that works. Then let's go down to a 6, and so on and so forth, and start to make those changes a little more subtly. And now one more best practice, and it's something I'm going to encourage you to do, especially for today, is when you're saving your rules, go ahead and save them as a prototype. This allows you to monitor the rule's behavior without creating new insights and alerts. And from a training standpoint, it allows you to not junk up our system, for lack of a better phrase. So we'll go ahead and do that when we get into that in just a few moments. So adding a rule tuning expression to an existing rule is going to be one of the easiest and most common ways for us to customize our rules. A rule tuning expression is going to be an end statement that we add to an existing rule. And as a best practice, we should use these rule tuning expressions when we have a small number of specific exceptions for existing rules. With rule tuning, we can modify those existing rules without rewriting them from scratch, which lets us customize and not do much work to get to them. Once we've written that tuning expression, and like I mentioned, we're going to write one in a few moments, we can go ahead and apply that tuning expression to multiple rules. We could have multiple tuning expressions applied to a single rule. So there's a lot of flexibility, and we're going to learn how to do both. We're going to apply one tuning expression to multiple rules, and then we're also going to apply multiple tuning expressions to one rule today. So you'll get both experiences. When you use that rule tuning instead of those when you use rule tuning instead of those customized rules, your tuning expressions are going to be retained when Sumo updates the rules. And so you get the advantage of all the rules Sumo pushes out to all its users. Now, let's start to talk about the insights. We've talked about them a lot, but let's start to get into kind of the math of them. Not too math heavy, but we are going to do so. So as a reminder, once the rule's in the system, whether it's a custom rule or one created by Sumo, Cloud SIEM is going to use it to create signals. As a reminder, and mentioned a few times, if a record matches a rule, an entity will be extracted from the record. Now, once an entity is in Cloud SIEM's system, Cloud SIEM is going to track the total severity score of signals associated with each entity as an activity score. And over the once the activity score gets high enough, which is going to be 12 by default, the insight will be created. So let's look at an example of that. And I think this example will be helpful. I think it's a good example. So let's see if you agree. All right, so what do we got here? What we want to focus on is the right-hand side of the screen, and the left-hand side of the screen is telling us what to focus on. But what we have here is 13 signals in our system from the last 2 weeks. Each shape or color, depending on how you want to look at it, represents a different signal. Some of these signals will have entity A. They have pink triangles. Some of these signals are associated with entity B, represented by the green squares. And some of these are associated with entity C, which are the blue circles. So we have pink triangles, green squares, and blue circles. Based on the rule that fired, each of these signals is going to have a severity score, which is going to be the number shown inside the object or the shape. Now remember, by default, an entity needs an activity score of 12 before an insight is created. The activity score is that sum of all the severity scores from the last 14 days. So once again, we have our pink triangles. There's 3 of them. They have a severity of a 7, a 6, and a 5. We have our 4 blue circles. They have a severity of a 1, a 2, a 2, and a 3. Actually, there's 5 of them. Yeah. Then we have our 5 green squares. These have a severity of a 1, a 2, a 2, a 3, and a 4. So the question that I'm asking you now is, of these signals, which are going to cluster into an insight? Are the blue circles going to cluster together and into an insight? Are the green squares going to cluster into an insight? And then finally, are the pink triangles? So think about it for a moment. Remember, we're looking for a score of 12 or above within 14 days to equal an insight. And now let's look to see the reveal. So let's talk about those pink triangles first. Entity A, which are those pink triangles, those are going to cluster together into an insight. Now there's only 3 signals, but they have a relatively high severity score, 7, 6, and 5. Added up, that equals 18, and so they're clustered together to form an insight. Next, we have our entity B, the green squares. Those are going to cluster together into an insight as well. Now, their scores are pretty low, 1s, 2s, and 3s, and a 4 in there, but there's a lot of them. And so the the activity score for the green squares equals 12, and so that creates an insight. Now, the blue circles. These are not going to cluster together into an insight yet. Cloud SIEM is going to track the entity on the entities tab, but currently the activity score is 10. 1 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2, 2 plus 3. And so until another rule with a severity of 2 or higher triggers with that entity, it will not cluster into an insight. And so what we wanted to show here is that visualization of the idea of you could have a large number of low severity score signals that don't create an insight. You could have a small number of high severity score signals that do create an insight. And so you want to keep this in mind when you're configuring the severity scores of your custom rules. All right, 2 more slides, then we're back to the labs. Now, what if you want let me take that one more time. What if you want to be alerted right away when a certain rule is triggered, or you don't want to use the default activity score of 12? This is where a custom insight can be helpful. And we're going to go through this in the labs as well. Custom insights let us create an insight based on a specific signal or a chain of signals, regardless of the severity scores. This is really going to be great for known specific threats to your system. And the other advantage of these custom insights is you don't need to change any of your existing rules and insights. They keep working normally, so you don't have to adjust the default settings for your activity scores. Now remember, Cloud SIEM's out-of-the-box rules and insights are great, but we want you to have that flexibility to customize your customize your environment. And so what we looked at were 3 simple ways to customize Cloud SIEM's rules and insights. First were the rule tuning expressions, those simple ways to add small exceptions and other clauses to existing rules. The custom rules that let you write logic that's unique to your system. And then those custom insights that allow you to get alerts based on just one rule or a chain of rules. So what I want us to do now is I want us to go back into Cloud SIEM Enterprise. We should still be in it, should still be active. I don't think we have timed out yet. And once we're in here, let's go ahead and grab our lab guide, represented over here, and let's go to lab 4. So with lab 4, what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to create, with these next labs, we're going to create some rules, some custom insights, but let's go ahead and start with the rule tuning expression first. So what we're going to do is create a rule tuning expression. As it says with the kind of little narrative we have here, here's the scenario we have. We're updating some of our firewalls in our system, and we don't want to trigger unnecessary alerts. And so what we want to do is we want to create a rule tuning expression that's going to allow us to bypass firewall related rules. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to create that rule tuning expression. To do so, we're going to go up to content and go to rule tuning. Once you're in here, you'll see any rule tuning expressions that have been created already. There aren't any. And so we want to create a new one. Now, when we create things today, I'd like you to use the naming scheme that we're encouraging to use. So we encourage you to use name, blah, blah, initials, and then the number you're logged in with. So this rule tuning expression, I'm going to call tuning expression JB234. Now I need to create the expression. I'm starting to create, but I need to finish it. Now the system's helpful here. It's letting me know I'm not done creating this expression, nor should I be because I haven't done anything yet, but it's letting me know, hey, I still need to do something else. And the something else I need to do now is specify what do I want to tune. So what I want to do here is I want to look for a rule. Specifically, I want to look for a firewall rule. More specifically, I want to look for the training firewall rule. Once again, I don't want to really mess with my, I'm using kind of air quotes for production environment. We're training, and so we want to mess around with the training stuff. So I'm going to select the training firewall alert here. Now, the next thing I need to do is I need to specify what expression I want to match. And that's going to go right here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the text that is in step 6 of lab 4, and I'm going to copy it and paste it. When I paste it, I'm going to go ahead and then specify my 3-digit number. The other thing I'm going to need to specify here, and you might notice in the image, the text is in red. I'm going to want to go ahead and redo my apostrophes here. This is mostly just an artifact pasting from PDF. And so what I should now have is a rule for firewalls that's saying essentially bypass my user. So I'm saying not my user. Once I have that all put together, I'm going to go ahead and click submit. If I did not put everything together properly, I would have that exclamation triangle right here, but I don't, so I should be good to go. I'm going to click submit. The system should tell me I'm good to go. The rule tuning expression has been created successfully. And just to confirm, in case I don't believe the system, I can go into content and rule tuning. And what I should see, although it might take a moment or two, because I think it caches, but it should show up my rule and then hopefully one of yours. Cool, so I see mine. I'm going to pause here just for a moment, just because I want to, hopefully everybody else is able to participate. So I'd like to see a few more rule tuning expressions in there. But if not, that's okay as well. All right, so let me just check one more time. Once again, any questions, please ask. I know you guys are quiet, and that's fine. Just want to make sure everyone's at a good place and at a good pace. There we go. There's another rule. Okay, I feel better. So cool. All right. So what we want to do is now we want to jump to lab 5. In lab 5, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new rule, and specifically a match rule. Now, the reason we want to use a match rule here is, as it says in the kind of narrative, we're concerned about traffic coming in from a particular IP address that's not covered by any of the default rules. So let's create that match rule. To do so, we're going to go to content and we're going to go to rules. When we do, and as we did earlier, we're going to see those 700 or so rules that Sumo has created and manages. But we can also create our own. And to do so, we click create. When we click create, now we need to specify what type of rule do we want to use. Do we want to use that very kind of match rule, which is that essentially binary true false? Do we want to get more advanced with the threshold or a chain rule? Well, for today, we're just going to do a match rule. Tomorrow, we're going to do, I think tomorrow we do threshold and chain. So you'll get some experience with those tomorrow. But like I said, today is just going to be the match rule. And not just the match rule. I mean, it's a good rule to use, but that's what we're using for right now. So we're going to select the match rule. And now we're going to give it a name. Once again, I'm going to encourage you to use the naming convention that we provide and put your numbers in properly. Well, that doesn't really matter that much. Now, what we want to do here is we want to fill in that left-hand side of the screen and the right-hand side of the screen, the if and the then. What needs to be triggered in order for the signal to be created? Well, that's what we're going to fill out. So what we're going to do for the if is we're going to go ahead and grab that device IP of 127.0.0.1. Once again, I think we're just using that just for testing. It's not, well, as Lynn pointed out, does show up. So we'll figure out a little bit why later, but we can go ahead and put that IP address in. And then I need to redo those apostrophes to turn it red. Now, what I'm going to do here is I can also add my tuning expression. So what I can say is look for that IP address and also look for my tuning expression of where the user does not equal training plus analyst 234. So now I've filled out my if side of the screen, and now I can fill out my then. So if these match, then we create the signal. Now, what are we going to create the signal on? We're going to utilize the entity. And for the entity, we're going to utilize that device IP. Now we need to go ahead and use, give it a name. So I'm just going to call it signal JB234. Summary and description. I'm just going to put test because I'm not very creative. And then I can specify down here, what severity score do I want to have triggered? So if this matches, do I want to go ahead and provide a severity score of 0 just for monitoring? Or do I want to make this a 10 and, kind of, have the alarm bell going off? For this case, I'm just going to put 1 or, I'll put 3. I don't know, just to put something. I can also utilize those tags that I was referencing earlier. So I can specify and have this associated with a specific MITRE attack framework technique or tactic. So I can go to my tactics, and then I can select the one that's appropriate, in this case, initial access. Once I have that all done, no exclamation point on the right, I'm good to go. But I do want to go ahead and have you save this rule as a prototype. This is that best practice that I recommended you do earlier, both in our training environment and in production as well, because you don't want to generate an insight right away. We want to kind of test it, make sure it's working properly first. And so once I'm done, I'll click submit. Take a few moments. And now I've created a match rule. I should now also be able to go to content and rules and refresh my rules. And now I should see my rule as well as yours. And then once again, it may take a few moments to load. I'll do it one more time. I don't want to wait too long. I know it's in there. So I feel comfortable with it, but I guess just to prove it, it'll show up in there eventually. All right, cool. I'm going to check one more time. Then I'll stop checking. All right, it's okay. But it will show up in there. Now, the last thing we want to do to wrap things up is participate in lab 6, which is going to be creating a custom insight. And so we want to do this when we want to be alerted right away when our custom match rule is triggered. And so the custom insight we're about to create is only going to look at the rule that we just created. So let's go ahead and go through these steps. Once again, we're going to go to the very top and go to content and select custom insights. Something I should have mentioned about the top options here are they are configurable by an administrator. And so there are more options here. For today's class, we only need these options. And so we've limited what you have access to. But as you'll see tomorrow, or even in the screenshot, you might have more options in your real environment. So just kind of a heads up or FYI. So for today, we want to go to content and we want to go to custom insights. If there are any custom insights, we would see them in here. There aren't because I clean them out periodically. And so we're going to create a new one. Now we're going to, kind of once again, fill in the blanks, the if and the then. So we're going to give it a name, continuing with our numbering, naming scheme. Down below, we're going to start to fill in the if. And so we're going to go ahead and look for rules. And the rule we want to look for is that rule we just created. So we want to say if the match rule is triggered, and order is not really, it's just not relevant here. So we can say in any order. If that rule is triggered that has a device IP of 127.0.0.1 and is not equal to my IP and my email address, go ahead and create an insight off of that or on that. And so we'll just go ahead and we can once again specify our tags here. And then we can submit it. And now, once again, proof, I guess, is if we go into custom insights, there we go. Good. Now I see yours and oh, good. See Sam in there as well. So cool. And so now we see our custom insights. All right. Now that's where we're going to wrap up today. Slide wise, that's it. So what we did is we wrote that rule tuning expression, we created that custom match rule, and then we created that custom insight. So going to open up to questions. I don't feel like there's going to be, well, if there's questions, please ask, of course. But if there's no questions, let's go into the exam. So once again, we're going to be taking an exam. If you've taken one with us before, you kind of know where I'm going with this. If you haven't, pay attention, I guess. But let's get into the exam. So what we're going to do now is we want to take the exam. It's important that we take the exam as ourselves. We want to take it not as training analyst 234, but as Bob, Bill, Jennifer, whoever we are. So let's just show you how to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to log out of my training account and I'm going to log into I'm kind of using air quotes, my production, my business account, the account my employer has provided to me. Everybody here should have their own Sumo account. It is without typos, and that's just not happening. Good question, Gabby. I'll show you the answer to that in a moment. So we're going to go ahead and log in as ourselves. Once we're logged in, we're going to go to certification. And then we're going to select Get Certified. This takes us into our training portal. And when we do, once we're in here, we have a couple options. The one we're going to want to use is Get Certified. I'm going to show the recorded session because that's the question Gabby asked, but let's get you to the exam first. So I'm going to point you to Get Certified. Once you go into Get Certified, you're going to see all the exams that we have available. There's a lot of them. There's multiple languages in there. The class that we're doing today is Cloud SIEM Fundamentals. So you're going to want to select the Cloud SIEM Fundamentals exam. And then go ahead and start it. The exam is going to consist of 20 multiple choice questions, or some are multiple choice, some are drag and drop, but they're all no free-form questions. You'll have 60 minutes to take it. You're not going to need all that time, but it's allocated to you. And if you do need it, of course, please use it. As a reminder, this exam and many of our other exams are open book, open resource, open Google. And so please use those resources. They're helpful to you. They exist in the real world. I think they should exist here. And so you're absolutely welcome to use any resource you can find, including just documentation. Now, what I wanted to show, so go ahead. Sorry. So once you start the exam, just want to show this last step. It's just in case you haven't taken an exam with us, it's not obvious. So this is why I just want to show it. So you'll start the exam. It says you only have one attempt. You have as many attempts as you need, so just kind of ignore that. You'll go through the exam and you'll submit your answers. And it will give you your score, which hopefully will be a lot better than this. Once you're done, or once you get your score, it's important that you click submit results. If you don't get credit for the exam, and it's bad UI in the testing environment. It's not Sumo, but it is something to be aware of. So it's important that once you're done, you do click that submit results. Once you're done, as a reminder, you are also eligible for the Uber Eats. So I'll go ahead and put that link. So once you pass the exam today, go ahead and send that certificate to or fill out the form and attach your certificate, and we'll send you that $15 Uber Eats voucher. If you participate tomorrow and take tomorrow's class and pass the exam, you get another voucher. So motivation. Now, the question that was asked just towards the end was by Gabby, and the question was, how do I get to the recorded sessions? So let me show you. It's very similar to where we just were. You're going to go into Sumo Logic. You're going to go to certification. You're going to go to get certified. Takes you to that training portal. And takes a moment or two. Or 3. Now, as mentioned, to get certified, you'll go to get certified. What you're interested in is the recorded session. Well, the recorded sessions are right here. And within the recorded session, we have all the aspects of this session. So for example, for today, you did Cloud SIEM fundamentals. If we go in here, we see the video, and I'm going to pause the video so I don't hear myself. And then we have access to the slides as well as the lab guide. And so you can access this at any time. If you can't attend administration tomorrow, you can still go into the administration section, register for free, and then do this at your own self-paced. Is there a particular flow? Wow, great question. And by flow, I assume you're meaning kind of order of taking the classes. I'm going to go with no, but let me elaborate that. So the fundamentals is the best place to start. Hopefully you've taken that already. It's the basics of Sumo Logic. I'd encourage everybody to start there. Then it's a little free form. So search mastery is appropriate if you want to learn more about the Sumo Logic query language. If you don't, then you wouldn't take it. Administration, if you're going to be doing administrative features within Sumo Logic, such as ingestion and collection, then that class would be appropriate for you. If you're not, then it wouldn't be. Cloud security, certainly if you're not relevant to cloud security, you wouldn't take that, but you might. So the short answer is really after fundamentals, it's pretty much a free-for-all. We are working on more defined learning paths, but it's really kind of what speaks to you. So I would encourage fundamentals, search mastery, and then whatever, but feel free to do what you're comfortable with. And as a reminder, these exams, these classes, these recordings are all available for you after today and essentially indefinitely. So don't feel that you have to get these done tomorrow. You can do them on your own schedule. All right, I'm going to go ahead and kind of shut up here because I know some of you are probably trying to take the exam already, and having me talk is not helping. And I'm primarily done. So let's go ahead and take the exam. Once you're done, of course, you're free to leave. We're a little early today, but I don't think anybody will have too many complaints about that. And hopefully you can join us tomorrow. So tomorrow at the same time, we're going to be doing the Cloud SIEM administration class. And as mentioned, we're really going to be taking that top portion of that data flow pipeline, and discussing that. And so we'll actually go ahead and ingest some data using the 127.0.0.1 address and some other things that I think, well, I was going to say they're fun. They are fun, but they're also quite helpful. Also, yes, Gabby, you can take the exam at any time. So we'd encourage you to take the exam now because you're here. It's time's allocated. Odell and I are going to be hanging out. But of course, life happens. And so if you need to take it later or at a future time, that's fine as well. And you can also redeem the Uber Eats later as well. That answers that question. Cool. All right, so once again, I'm going to put myself on mute. If there are questions, go ahead and ask. I can come back in or just answer them in the chat. But I want to thank you again for attending, and I hope I see you guys tomorrow. Tomorrow will be a little faster as well because much of the content we covered tomorrow is covered today, and so you'll it's not as much of a time commitment tomorrow, but you know, I don't want you to just come just because it's just short class. I hope you enjoy the material. So thank you, everybody. Let's see, one question about providing the link for the exam. So I can't actually provide a direct link. What I can do is just point you to it. So once again, Hari, once you're logged into your own Sumo Logic account, you're going to go to certification and go to get certified. And you have to go through this method. Now, I could give you, I'm not going to, but just to help you understand, as you see, it redirects. So the website, all right, cool, you got it. Thank you, Hari. I was going on a bit of a tangent there, so good. All right, cool. So I'm going to put myself on mute. I'm going to leave up this slide, just as a reminder. Odell and I will be hanging out with you for a little bit. And, you know, once again, thank you again, and we'll see you all tomorrow.